Hey all you heroes out there, I'm your professional protagonist, and welcome to part 3 of Let's Make a Fighting Game! The series in which I go over the building blocks of game design so that we can create our own theoretical fighting game, Quantum Combat! Last time, we determined our subgenres and created the basic mechanics of this fighting game. But before we move on, we've got to call out our subscriber of the day, Tempest Plays, for showing great character by suggesting a better name for one of the mechanics, the quantum state, which shall from now on be known as the quantum flux, or just flux for short. Thanks! And hey, if you want to be the subscriber of the day, then all you gotta do is leave a comment down below on this video, or any other video, or any of our community posts here on the channel. Easy peasy. Don't try to cheat either, because YouTube shows me this fancy little red dot that tells me that you're subscribed. And cheating shows a distinct lack of character. Boy, I'm mentioning the word character a lot, aren't I? Character. Character. I wonder why I've got the word character in the brain. So anyway, we're here to talk about stage design today. All kidding aside, I sincerely think that characters in fighting games in particular are the single most important aspect of game design. More than the combat mechanics, more than the story insofar as there is one, more than the style or genre or super flashy moves, or yes, even more so than the stages. Characters are the absolute cornerstone for fighting games in particular. The single most important and vital aspect of them. Oh sure, in just about any form of art or media that progresses a story, characters are important. But in fighting games specifically, they carry an even greater load than usual. Think about it for a minute. In almost any other genre of game, even if character work is lacking, there's other aspects to it which you could latch onto and still have a quality game experience, right? In platformers and exploration-based games, the setting can be intriguing and interesting enough to capture your attention. In action and adventure games, the combat can be flashy and cool enough to overcome a dull protagonist. Heck, even games that are highly story-driven, with powerful themes and events, the characters themselves can end up being quite dull and feel more like they're, well, background pieces, mere cardboard cutouts, than actually portraying rounded and well-developed individuals. But in a fighting game, the mechanics, the story, the setting, nearly every aspect of other portions of game design is all centered on the characters themselves. They're the sole focus 99.999% of the time. They carry the mechanics with them. The story is all based on why it is that they're fighting each other, even if it's just a basic excuse plot. Even the setting, the world which serves as the background to these characters in their big fights, really feels more like, well, background. In a fighting game, the characters embody all other aspects of game design. They are the game. That's why everyone has a favorite fighter to play as. Whether it's because they synergize well with a particular style, or they just think that this one guy, it looks really cool. It's important that every character is unique enough that they feel like they could be the protagonist of their own story. Absolutely nobody is background or a side character. That's the mentality that I took in designing this roster. So how did I go about the specifics of designing these characters? Well, there's a lot to consider, but at the foundation of it all is variety. Like I said before, everyone has their own favorite, and the reasons for why they choose their favorites vary all over the place, person to person. Different things appeal to different people. I know, sounds like an obvious statement about life in general, but it's still an important detail to consider. That's why I wanted to make sure that I included a wide variety of personalities, fighting styles, a wide variety of races, aesthetics, body types, age groups, you name it. Thankfully, my concept for this game is a time travel story involving elements of both sci-fi and fantasy throughout all history in a big kitchen sink plot, left me with plenty of variety to choose from. In some regards, it's been a little bit too open-ended and led to some decision paralysis at times. First, I started by coming up with a list of various character archetypes. A very straightforward grab bag of the different sorts of characters that you could see in any sort of story or plot. The delinquent with a heart of gold, the red-blooded hero, the charming swashbuckler, the grizzled veteran haunted by the ghosts of his past. Those sorts of things. Then I compiled a list of various different fighting styles, whether they're officially recognized martial arts or not. From there, I started assigning these different fighting styles to the different archetypes based on what I felt fit or could create an interesting or unique spin. At this time, I started assigning these various characters different origins, both in terms of their birth country and the time period in which they are from, which led to refining these simple archetypes into a more solid concept. For example, I started with the grizzled veteran and assigned him the fighting styles of brawling and conjuration, which led to me refining the concept into a cowboy from the American Old West who could manifest the guilt of his past and other ghosts into the spirits that aid him in battle. Concepts that felt too similar to others were scrapped, as well as some that I felt I really couldn't develop as well as I wanted to. And when I was done, I had a roster of 20 characters, including the big bad villain. Now, I will say in the previous videos of this project, I have talked about working within my means, meaning not trying to overreach if this ever did become a project that was picked up by a development studio, since it would most likely be a smaller, more indie development team that would reach out to me about making this thing, and not some big company with oodles of cash to just throw on to the development. And that has caused me to be a little bit more reserved on some of my ambitions. Skullgirls is a wildly popular indie fighting game, and it only launched with 8 characters. Absolutely minuscule compared to larger, established AAA studios. NetherRealm or Capcom will launch games with rosters somewhere in the 20s. And Atlus, who aren't indie but also aren't one of the big powerhouse developers, it usually hovers around 16. So realistically, my roster size of 20 is almost certainly out of the realm of possibility if I were looking to be realistic on this. But you know what? I just couldn't bring myself to cut any of these characters. I got too attached to the concepts while I was making them. And I know it's not feasible, but I don't care. If Quantum Combat were to ever get picked up by a studio and developed, and they couldn't dedicate the resources to making all 20 characters, we'll just have to determine our core roster, and the rest we can dedicate to DLC down the line. So that's my justification for refusing to cut any of my ideas. I can relegate any extras to DLC. So now that you know a little bit about the actual design process behind these characters, we can jump into some of the characters themselves. Due to the sheer depth that we'll be talking about in this roster, they're only going to be able to cover a few characters per video. Stick around until the end, and you will be able to vote on which characters that you want to see pop up in the next video. But for now, we have to lay the groundwork by establishing the 2 most important to the story. The villain who drives the plot forward. and the protagonist who overcomes their machinations.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Arthur C. Clarke.
For as long as humanity has existed, we have attributed the fantastical to matters which we do not understand. Before the study of science was widespread, many believed its practitioners to be wizards. Before medicine and herbalism was just another aspect of science, those who knew their craft well were shamans or witches. Before we understood the true physics of the nature of our world, we assigned its structure to be the work of gods or spirits. If a technology can be advanced enough to be indistinguishable from magic, then surely the user of a mighty enough technology could be indistinguishable from a god. Kronas Axcel is that god. Or at least he presents himself as such. He introduces himself as the timekeeper, the arbiter of the time stream, though in reality his true title is the Golden Demon. Born in the distant future on New Earth, April 13th, 39,666. Kronas is a genius of unparalleled intellect, even by the standards of his incredibly advanced time. His name is a play on Kronos, the Greek titan of time, and accelerate. While his birthday is composed of numbers considered to be bad luck from various cultures across the world. April is the 4th month of the year, and in many Eastern Asian countries, the number 4 means death. 13, of course, needs no explanation. 39 is considered a bad number in many Middle Eastern countries, though I admit I was not able to find out exactly why in my research. And of course, the 666 isn't exactly subtle, is it? But what can I say? I enjoy having meaningful names and birth dates to my characters. Watch out for special meanings in the future characters, and the particular eagle-eyed of you may be able to figure out some of their themes before we can actually go in depth in their discussion. The meanings for Kronos, of course, are fairly obvious. He's related to time, and he's not exactly a nice dude that you want to hang out with, have a barbecue, then go play a few rounds of Smash Bros. Afterward. He is as unstable as he is brilliant, as self-aggrandizing as he is powerful. For his design, I wanted to marry the concepts of divinity and science together, to portray his true origins through the image that he projects. He comes from a time when humanity has evolved and changed from what we would recognize as a normal person, giving him some features that are fairly alien, even uncanny, such as his tall, lanky beanpole of a body, his sunken cheeks and long face, reminiscent of the elves from the Elder Scrolls universe, which helped to contribute to his otherworldly image. The technology, which is the source of his power, which we'll cover a little bit later down in the video, even appears as a series of golden rings, like a halo suspended just before his chest. As a side note, the character art that you'll see in this, as well as all future videos in this series, were done magnificently by Ian Torben. His work speaks for itself, but I've still got to sing his praises. I've known the guy since elementary school, and I have never met someone more committed to mastering every single aspect of his chosen craft. He works in just about any style or medium that you can imagine. So go check out his work on his Instagram @TorbenCreations and be blown away. Details in the description below the video. And with that plug out of the way, let's get more into Kronas as a character. As previously stated, he was born in a future time when technology has advanced to a state that is unrecognizable by our current standards. This is a humanity that has spread across the stars, founded new colonies, and discovered the answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet. All knowledge of humankind is kept in a collective network, a sort of external neural system that behaves like a cloud, something that anybody can access by mere thought alone. Despite this achievement in knowledge, children are not allowed to access the collective network due to their impressionable minds being not yet fully developed. Every person is raised as an individual first and foremost, so that they can develop properly. Only one exception was ever made. For one single, brilliant mind without peer. Kronas Axcel graduated their equivalent of high school at the mere age of 5, and by 11 had been working on his third equivalent to the doctorate. Due to his prodigious mind, he was able to plead his case before a grand tribunal to make an exception and gain access to the collective network, and passed by a single vote. This ruling became widely recognized as the single greatest mistake in human history. Even though certain data was off limits due to the danger that it presented, Kronos' mind was brilliant enough to work around these security restrictions in order to sate his curiosity. What he found was the horrible, wretched aspects of human history, the most disgusting parts of humanity, the emotional patterns of the deranged and psychotic, the thought frequencies of the narcissistic and tyrannical, the worst tortures and pains ever experienced. In other words, Kronos had become one with despair and madness. While his connection to the network was severed, the damage dealt to his psyche had already been done and was irreparable. His mind molded around the worst of humanity, unable to reconcile all of the different perspectives, outlooks, and ideals. His personality became a barely functioning mishmash of his original self and so many others, leading to a unique mental affliction of constantly changing symptoms. His intellect, however, was not dulled, which he put to good use as not just a criminal, but a disaster on a grand and cosmic scale. His machinations led to the genocide of entire systems, ranging from cruel and efficient to bizarre and unusual. Eventually, the peacekeepers were able to catch up to him due to his deteriorating sanity. And though he did escape alive, it was not without severe injury. This moment inspired Kronos to become something greater than before. A perfect being. A god. He enhanced his body with a device that drew power from the fabric of space-time itself, as well as enhancing himself through other bionic additions. With this device, he could warp space and time, and used it to create a pocket universe, separate from our own, from which to plan out his next steps. But what to do now? He determined that his next phase was to take inspiration from others. He scouted the timeline for amazing fighters and powerful individuals who could be plucked from their own times to be pitted off against one another. His intentions were to entice them with false rewards, create facsimiles of their own domains within his own universe, and pit them against one another in a battle to the last one standing, in order to observe their techniques in action as well as how they evolve through the conflict. It's a tricky balancing act, choosing worthy combatants who also aren't important enough to history that they would wind up negating his own birth. But he was able to find 19 test subjects who he determined could help him further evolve. Of course, it would never be enough. None of it could ever answer the question that he really needed to know, the one that even he was unaware he's really asking. Who am I? Whew, that was a lot. It definitely needed to be, though, since our big bad is the main driving force behind everyone else's story. You may have noticed one detail that I slipped into Kronos' backstory, that he created facsimiles of each of the combatants' own domains within his pocket universe. And the quick-witted of you have surely put together the importance of that detail. That is the justification for the beat-em-up stages. They'll be made to represent each character and be filled with enemies and hazards that are unique to that particular individual's affiliations, time zone, environment. You get the picture. Of course, the enemies in the stages won't actually be alive. The entire place is more like a simulation brought on by Kronas' abilities and technology. Think something along the lines of the holodeck from Star Trek and you're on the right course. Now, as for how Kronas fights, I decided to give him a very kick-heavy style, similar to Taekwondo. Theoretically, he could fight with just about any style ever conceived, but I enjoy the image of someone who considers himself so high above the others that he dare not deign to dirty his hands with them. As far as playstyle is concerned, he would be what's commonly known as a rushdown character. Someone who plays aggressively to get in fast and deal heavy amounts of damage very quickly, striking with fast, hard-hitting combos, but lacking in the defensive side of things. As he fights, his attacks will be surrounded by a golden aura generated from the device on his chest. Speaking of that power generator, that brings us to Kronas' flux ability, Golden Halo. While Kronas has less than 3 bars of super meter, holding down the flux button will allow him to rapidly build super meter as he draws on energy from his reactor, really letting you take advantage of those super moves and those shift abilities. However, if he already has 3 bars of super meter, then instead it will activate Shining Mio, which leads to this! BAM! A full-on transformation. As energy ripples through his body, space warps around him, shattering his goggles to create this halo crown effect above his head. His clothing tatters, and some of the fabric remains floating in the distorted space around him, inspired heavily by various Buddhist, Shinto, and Hindu gods. Activating Shining Mio eats up all 3 bars of super meter, but gives Kronas a massive boost to all of his stats across the board. Additionally, his flux now becomes 108 halos, which rapidly generates super meter just like Golden Halo, but even faster. In terms of his specials, the first is a wide-arcing, overhead double kick, inspired by the infamous genocide cutter used by Rugal in the King of Fighters series. This attack is the Shiva Nataraja,
Dance of Destruction.
The second special calls down a bolt of lightning directly in front of him, the Holy Fire.
I smite thee.
His third special would charge up his legs for a multi-hitting, spinning kick that crosses the stage, similar to the Tatsu from Street Fighter, though Kronas uses both his legs. This is the Wheel of Tyrannus.
Crushing Wheel.
The fourth and final special functions as a sort of get off me by blasting a short-range wave of energy around him, originating from his power device, Essence of Balder.
You cannot harm me.
And thus that brings us to Kronas' super moves, which produce a different effect depending on how much super meter is used, from 1 to 3 bars. His level 1 super is the Spear of Gwondi, which has Kronas backflip 3 times, bicycle kicking all the way, moving up and forward with each flip. Each kick launches out a golden energy projectile, creating 3 arcs moving diagonally upward.
Fall to my spear.
The level 2 super is the Hand of Buddha. One of the few times that Kronas will use his hands, he supercharges it with energy, creating a golden construct, which he slams down to cover a wide area in front of him.
Stay buried forever.
His third and final super, requiring all 3 bars of super meter to pull off, goes by a name my fellow Magic the Gathering players will know quite well. Wrath of God. After a moment of charge up, Kronas blasts forward what can only be described as a huge F-off laser beam from his Halo reactor for massive damage. As a bonus, if you manage to pull it off in Shining Mio form, then it becomes the only instant kill move in the entire game. Of course, you have to max out your super meter twice within a single round to accomplish this, which is unlikely under ideal conditions, which will make it all the greater of a spectacle.
I shall not see you before me.
And that covers Kronas Axcel, our big bad, the main driving force behind the story of this game. But of course, a villain cannot exist without a hero. This may be an ensemble cast, but one is destined to shine brighter than the rest. It's time to look at the other side of the coin and get a first look at our protagonist.
Don't be distracted by the what-ifs, should-haves, and if-onlys. The only thing you choose for yourself, that is the truth of your universe.
Many philosophers have concluded that ultimately, the world is what we make of it, and there is no one grand, unifying answer to everything. We're all just individuals, working our way through life the best that we can. Put simply, we are who we choose to be. Enter Apinya Seigi, the Phoenix Viper. I modeled Apinya largely as a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure style hero. A gruff and rough individual who initially comes off as an anti-hero, but has the heart of a truly good person, and the morals of a traditional hero. He came about as I was tinkering with the archetype of a traditional Japanese delinquent biker person, with a heart of gold. You know, the type common in 80s and 90s anime, with their pompadour hair and whatnot. But of course, I had to put my own variations and spins on the concept, subverting various tropes in what I think to be some clever ways. I thought that this character would make a great hero because he directly contrasts Kronas in a lot of ways. He's crude and sometimes a bit of a jackass, but never arrogant or condescending. He's got a rough exterior, but a brilliant soul. He'll never back down in the face of cruelty or injustice. And most importantly of all, he has always known exactly who he is in this crazy, messed up world we live in, despite being told otherwise throughout his entire life. Born on March 3rd, 1976, in Tokyo's Shibuya Prefecture, to a Japanese father and a Thai immigrant mother, Apinya was initially raised as a girl, but he always knew he wasn't a girl. And having inherited his attitude and spirit from his strong-willed mother, had no qualms being direct and confrontational with others about it, much to the shock of his teachers and peers. Still, it wasn't a terrible life. That changed when he was 8 years old, and his father died in a plane crash on a business trip to the UK. The grief only worsened his attitude, which naturally attracted bullies. Girls thought he wasn't feminine enough and that he would never be able to attract a boyfriend. And the boys accused his mother of prostitution for never remarrying. So, naturally, he started kicking their asses. His mother attempted to curb this anger through discipline and began teaching Apinya the ways of their ancestors. Muay Thai kickboxing. In many ways it worked. Apinya overcame his anger problems by channeling that energy into another outlet. And excelling in the art form helped him to understand and come into his own as a man. It was less helpful in other ways, however. Sure, he wasn't taking swings at any random punk who pissed him off anymore, but he still couldn't let an injustice go, and demolished any bullies who refused to back down. Sure, he got into less fights, but mostly because people were now afraid of him. It didn't matter that he only raised his fists to those who deserved it. It didn't matter that he never disrespected anyone who didn't have it coming. All that mattered to the powers that be was that some girl was going around beating the snot out of boys who had bright futures ahead of them. Not helping matters was his mother growing lethargic and distant, no longer having the energy to even take care of herself. Apinya decided to drop out of school and moved to Shinjuku, where nobody knew who he was and he was free to create the image of himself that he wanted. It didn't take long for Apinya to face down a gang of bikers, led by a man calling himself Black Orochi. In a single night, he took on all 20 members of the gang, then dueled Black Orochi for the right to leadership. The gang leader was left battered and humiliated, bound in chains. Apinya rallied the gang in a new direction, a direction that would take a group of delinquents into the light as defenders of the people, doling out good old-fashioned street justice to the bullies and criminals nobody else could or would challenge. Thus, the people began to call him the Phoenix Viper for granting new life to the snakes from the ashes of their old shame. Then, Apinya received the most devastating news of his life. His mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. It all clicked into place now. Why she had become so withdrawn, so sluggish in daily life. She couldn't take care of herself, and nobody knew until now. With nothing else to be done, Apinya supported his mother the best that he could. He even shaved his head in solidarity for her treatment, though he did get a pompadour wig for appearance sake. Unfortunately, solidarity was all that could be done, as his mother was not responding to the treatment. She had only weeks left. And that's when Kronas appeared before him, with the promise of changing anything he wanted with the timeline, so long as he came out on top in a contest of battle. Apinya agreed, if it meant he could cure his mother's cancer. Alright, well, that got heavy for a moment, didn't it? Let's lighten the mood and talk about Apinya's playstyle. Like Kronas, he'll be more offensive heavy, but with a more balanced approach, rather than high speed, high power, low defense. That said, Muay Thai is still a highly aggressive style, known as the art of 8 limbs, for making use of elbows and knees just as much as fist and foot. Apinya would have a lot of multi-hitting attacks, such as a punch that follows through into an elbow, that sort of thing. Blocking is also an important aspect of Muay Thai, known as the wall of defense, wherein practitioners condition their body to tank through hard, devastating strikes so that they can power through their opponents. All in all, Muay Thai is the perfect martial art for Apinya's personality, and this is exemplified through his flux, Phoenix Rising! This is the only flux in the entire roster that can only be used once per round, and it embodies his sheer grit and determination to power and push through any obstacle. Once activated, Phoenix Rising gives Apinya a raw power damage boost that scales according to how much damage Apinya has taken so far in that round of fighting. If your health bar is full, then the flux fizzles and does nothing. If he only has a little damage, then he'll only receive a small boost in power. But if it's used while he's in critical condition, then his power would skyrocket, potentially doubling depending on what's the best way to properly balance the individual mechanics of the game during actual development. There's a lot of risk versus reward in Phoenix Rising, since in order to get the maximum benefit, you have to already be near loss, meaning that it may be more beneficial to get a smaller power boost in the long run at an earlier point during the match. Moving on to his specials. The first one is the Viper Strike, and it functions as a classic forward rush attack. Apinya jets across the stage with a single fist extended, piercing right through a struck opponent, causing them to crumple behind him while he suffers through some end lag animation.
Out of my way.
His second special pays tribute to the famous Tiger Knee, used by Sagat of Street Fighter fame. It begins much the same, a rising knee attack, though in Apinya's case, it's cloaked in blue ki. At the apex of his jump, Apinya extends his leg forward into a diving kick, now cloaked in pink ki. This is the Flamebird Talon.
Fly away!
His third special releases a classic Hadouken-style fireball key projectile forward, released by a single punch. The special can be charged to increase its size and damage, with the weakest version doing very little damage and no stagger. This is the Venom Bullet.
Hiyo!
And his final special is the Ashen Wall, which is a counter move. Apinya lifts his knee and forearm into a classic Muay Thai guard, and if struck during this animation, cancels the attack and blasts his opponent with a short-range wave of ki.
You'll never break me.
Which brings us to his 3 super moves. At level 1, Apinya performs a multi-strike combo attack. That's a flurry of kicks, punches, elbows, knees. It ends with him grabbing the opponent by the head and pulling them down at the same time he lifts his knee, slamming it right into their face. The Orochi Slayer.
Time to finish this.
Level 2 opens with a headbutt, and if it lands, the move transitions into a cinematic, which begins with the disoriented opponent crumpling. Apinya then drives over them with his motorcycle, stopping to spin the tires over on their body for a moment, then leaps off as the motorcycle accelerates forward off screen. This particularly brutal super move is the snake-devouring raptor.
Let's take this to the streets.
Which finally brings us to the level 3 super move, which was inspired by what is potentially the single most famous move in fighting game history. The Shoryuken! More specifically, its fully evolved form, the Shinryuken. This attack takes the form of an uppercut, in which Apinya cloaks his body in blue and pink ki, which seems to burn like fire, with 2 wings extending outward as he spins upward in a spiral motion, rising higher and higher, hitting an opponent caught in the attack several times until they're blasted away at the apex of the jump with an explosive blast of ki. This is the bird that reduces heaven to ash, or the Ten Ohai Nisuru Tori.
I'll make my own path.
It is a fitting technique for a hero facing down a villain who styles himself a god. And of course, the ashes of a phoenix are not a symbol of destruction, but of rebirth, a sign of something greater to come. Which brings our overview of the protagonist to a close. Whew! 2 characters, villain and hero, spotlighted. Since the first portion of this video served to go over the general character creation process, I wasn't able to include any more characters without bloating the length of this thing. In the future, I'm hoping to do 3, maybe 4 characters per video, if I can properly fit them. My hope is that as I tell the stories of each of these characters, you will find one to serve as your favorite that you latch onto. The one that makes you say, yeah, I really want to play that character. Just like you would for Street Fighter, or Mortal Kombat, or King of Fighters, or Guilty Gear, or any of those others. Thank you for joining me as we build our roster for Quantum Combat. Be sure to leave a vote in the comments down below for the 2 characters you see on screen now for who you would like to be most featured in our next episode. And I'll see you in the next one with a great, big, hell yeah!